I'm going to go onto here in a minute. Okay, so press that.
Yep.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Good morning. So this is my AMA, Ask Me Anything. I'm Nick Knight, I'm the director of SHOWstudio. And these AMAs are designed so that I can try and answer some of the questions that we get and I get on Instagram and on YouTube. Partly because I think if somebody asks a question, it's polite and correct to try and answer it, even if I don't necessarily have the information to do so, but at least I'll have a go at it. So anyway, thank you for watching. And I'll just start off and we'll read through. Sadly today, in fitting with the pandemic, I haven't got my assistant Tom Alexander with me, which is a great shame. So I will try and do this by myself and see how I get on. I've got Michael here, so if things go really, really badly wrong, Michael can save the day, but hopefully we won't need to. So starting off with this question that came in on a Zoom shoot I did for British Vogue. I've been doing a lot of Zoom shoots over the pandemic, over the lockdown, partly because I think it's a fascinating way to work, partly because it's the only way to work. During the pandemic, I was approached by lots of different people to say, okay, well, you know, you've been saying for the last 20 years there's a better way of showing fashion rather than just magazines and catwalks, so now show us what you can do. So I started looking at different ways of doing it, because one of the interesting things that's come up through the isolation is that the use of the app Zoom. So a lot of stuff that I've done has been done across Zoom. And the first one I approached, I did two starting off. One was for SHOWstudio, which is still running, which we're still doing Zoom films. And one was for British Vogue. And Kate Phelan and Edward approached me and said, okay, we want to try and continue to produce content for British Vogue, so what can we do? And I said, well, I think you should just approach Zoom just as any other camera, and forget the quality. It'll be the quality it is. It depends on the person's connection and the date of their laptop and to what quality image we get from it. So then let's just look at it that way. And so we arranged to work with probably 10 different models across the world, and they each booked a session. Kate Phelan, the stylist, sent them a piece of clothing that they could wear. In most cases, 2 pieces of clothing they could wear. And then literally we came on, and just like any other, you'll all be familiar with Zoom calls, you know, then I just start directing them, say, okay, well, stand a bit closer to the wall, or put your hand over your head, or you're just directing like you would do normally behind a camera. So in a way, it's very normal. You're just talking to somebody and you're asking them to have an attitude or a pose, and you're doing you're frame grabbing as you go. So it was punctuated by that noise. No, you can't hear it, but it's sort of the noise of the frame grab was kind of the sort of replaced the sort of click of the camera shutter going down. So in a way, it was a very normal experience for everybody involved. What was different, of course, is that we weren't flying huge teams of people across the world, which was better, and which was also different is it felt modern. It felt like a new way of doing things, and felt more akin to the age that we're living in. Not just the awful pandemic, but also just this idea that we are in contact with each other through the internet and across the world in a way we've never been able to before. It gives rise to a lot of different conversations and a lot of different ways of doing things. Actually, I'm sorry, rambling. I'll just try and answer the question. So somebody called Anthony, Anthony Clark-Arch, Anthony Clark-Arch, wrote with this picture, great pic, and I always enjoy your work. How does a Zoom photo shoot work? So to answer that question slightly more precisely, a Zoom photo shoot works exactly like that. That you contact the model, you have the hair, the makeup, the styling, or whoever else you would need for a normal shoot. You have them in the little Zoom windows at the top, and for the first hour or so, the hairdresser says, well, I think you should put your hair like this, or put this gel in it, and then the makeup artist says, well, I think you should put just some sort of base on, and then just a lip. So we direct them. Of course they can't touch them physically, but they can direct them. And the same is true for the styling. The stylist will say, okay, well, let's try it with that red coat. No, actually, drop it off your shoulders or whatever. So it's very, very similar to the process that we would do normally. But of course, a slightly different thing is, of course, you're all there at the same time. Normally, when you do a shoot, the hairdresser and makeup artists are up in a different room, which I don't normally go in, or hardly ever. And same with the styling, and I stayed in the studio. So, but this time I'm actually there whilst they're doing the hair and the makeup, and I'm watching and talking. So that sort of relationship between those main players of the model, the stylist, the makeup artist, the hairdresser, etc., and myself, are all very present, which they're normally a little bit more fractured than that. So normally when the model has her hair and makeup done and is dressed, she will come down onto my set and I'll start working with her. So there is a sort of physical division, if you want. So in some ways, the Zoom call brings you more closer together, brings you actually more, it unites you more, and in some ways you get that interaction a bit more, in a bit more of a concentrated way. So that was different, and at the same time a bit the same. So it's an interesting thing. I like the idea of working on Zoom, and I've got 3 or 4 questions on this. Anthony Clark asked again another question: how much editing is involved? Well, a ton of it actually. Selecting the frame, so we're screen recording the whole thing, and the model is screen recording from her side, and then she sends us the files, which we download, and I go through frame by frame, which is enormously time consuming, and it takes up days of my life just going through literally, but you can't just let it go because you might miss something. So there's a horrible feeling that you just skip a bit, saying, oh, she wasn't doing anything particularly photogenic at that point. You might miss something. So in the end, yes, I go through all, and the sessions are an hour long or 2 hours long. So it's a lot of film to go through frame by frame, but I've done that before when I've been taking stills from films. It's a laborious and time-consuming process. But it does mean that you get every little, you don't miss anything. So that's how it works. So yes, there's a ton of editing, and it took for, I think we did 10 models, roughly 10 models. There's about 4 days shooting or 5 days shooting, so about 2 a day. Then it was probably 2 weeks every day of editing, going through and taking stills. So there's a lot of work that goes in. On the same story, somebody called, I'll spell it and I'll try and say it, Andre, Imusat, IMUSAT 10, says how exactly is it shoot through Zoom? Can you explain the process behind it? Well, hopefully, Andre, I've done that. But I just felt, I've done a lot this season through all this year through Zoom. And because of the awful pandemic, it's pushed people to look for different ways of doing things. I would hate to say in any ways any silver lining to this cloud of the pandemic, because it's too awful to even merit a silver lining. So, but a byproduct of it, which is probably a more suitable term, is this way that people have sought to find new ways to communicate fashion. And that's been, I'm going to try and get on to questions later on, for John Galliano at Margiela, for Pier Paolo at Valentino, for Vogue, for SHOWstudio, for lots of different people, for Fendi. There's been a desire to sort of look at different ways of kind of looking at the approaching the photo shoot. Somebody else again on the same shoot, about the same shoot, Sanny Vision, SANNYVISION, wrote, what's your favourite thing about shooting through Zoom? My favourite thing about shooting through Zoom is it actually feels very elegant in some ways. It's just hard to explain. And also in my head, and only in my head, I'm seeing the film The Man Who Fell to Earth, and David Bowie sitting in front of hundreds of TV screens, and imagining that that's kind of the situation I'm in. I think weirdly, when you sort of, you think about what you do, you probably look at other people who've done it really beautifully and in an aspirational way, and you think, oh, I'd love to be at least something like that person. I remember sort of, watching, Blow Up, or, those sort of things. You think, oh, that's a character. But of course, that's what films are about creating characters we want to be. And David Bowie in Man Who Fell to Earth, surrounded by TV screens, taking in all this different information from all different parts of the world, sort of felt like quite a nice a way of thinking about what Zoom might look like, and indeed is an interesting way of working, and probably a more contemporary way of working than the old-fashioned blow-up type way of working, where you have a sort of photographer going into a studio and working in that sort of way. A lot of people say, oh, I can't wait to get back to the studio, I can't wait to back, but I didn't find that. I found actually I can't wait to do another Zoom shoot. I think it's really fascinating So just to say that, you know, I'll deal with other Zoom shoots I did through, because a lot of questions come from that. But I found it a fascinating way of working and really quite interesting to explore. And the idea that we don't have to fly ourselves and models and clothes and everything else perpetually around the world. When I first talked to Kate Fien about doing it, I said, well, let's not fly the clothes anywhere. Let's just work with models who are literally, you know, next to where they produce the clothes. So if there's a model in Milan or Rome, let's work with her. You know, let's try and find models that actually live physically near where the clothes are produced. It couldn't be done, unfortunately. But it did mean we didn't have to fly people across the world to model or to do their hair and makeup. I find all that travel particularly disagreeable, to be honest. There really is no glamour if you have to travel a lot. And the idea that, you know, it's just another thing polluting the planet. I'm very pleased to see the back of it. And I don't, you know, I'm not somebody who believes that you can't experience something unless you're there for real. You know, theatre was replaced in the 1960s by television. One can argue that theatre is a very enjoyable experience, and it certainly is. But in the way that people's lives worked, in the sort of facility of watching entertainment, television became a replacement for theatre. I don't see any reason why the fashion shows have to keep on this way, where they're just producing the same style of showing the designers' collections in the same way year in, year out, and have been doing so for the last 70 years or more. I think it's high time for change, and a better change. And I think, although, as I say, you know, theatre is a beautiful art form, actually the more appropriate art form to deliver entertainment in the 1960s and then onwards 70s and 80s became television. In the way that, you know, most people now use their phones to get information. They don't sit around a television and get their news from that. You can argue that it's worth or whether it's better. It's just different. And if it fits into the zeitgeist, it fits into the way people live their lives at the moment, then it's probably more appropriate. And I think the whole idea of a Zoom call and trying to create images through Zoom is perfectly appropriate. And if that's how we're living at the moment, then that's the appropriate way to do it. Okay, so moving on a little bit. The Valentino show, Pier Paolo came to me again at the beginning of lockdown and said, I want to do a couture show. Can you tell me, you know, how we could do that? So long conversations ensued. And in the end, we did something which is Pier Paolo did these incredibly long dresses, sort of beautiful visions, or ghostly visions almost, of these sort of 20-foot dresses. And we used those as projection screens, almost, so that they were in the blackness. We projected images across them because Pier Paolo couldn't access the atelier to embroider them or to colour them or dye them. So I'll do them in white, and then you provide the imagery that sits upon them. And so we did that, and I worked with a filmmaker called Britt Lloyd and a set designer called Andrew Tomlinson, and we created a sort of way of working where we were in SHOWstudio, and again via Zoom directed a very, very good team of filmmakers in Cinecittà, which is Fellini's old studio in Rome, and we projected images onto the dresses, and then they filmed, and we were in contact by headphones, which is actually quite normal how you would be. We were in contact with the filmmakers and the cameramen, and just saying directly, okay, so now do a pan up the dress, now stay on the face, you know, now move to the back, now use the crane and go over the top, now cut to the camera too. So just in the same way you would direct a film in any case, that's what we're doing. We had you know, the model could hear our voices, so to some degree she could respond to our requests. Then we put the film together, and there's a lot of talk. Pier Paolo wanted to sort of make some link between the digital world and the real world, as he called it. And one of the things we did, one of the devices we did to try and explain that was to produce these glitches. It actually came from when we were sitting and watching the broadcast, and quite naturally the broadcast would break every so often, and you'd have these digital glitches. And I've always been a huge fan of the kind of, you know, lo-fi digital mistake, the things that when your iPhone goes wrong, or when your phone goes wrong, or your computer breaks, or whatever, the things that happen by accident, because there's some feeling that actually the fragility of the computer, which seems such a robust system, when it breaks, it exposes its workings a bit more. And also the images become very painterly in a modern sense. So instead of being sort of literal representations of somebody, they became these odd, colour-filled, pixelated moments where bits of the image before were still left on the screen, other bits came, and they're incredibly beautiful. And so we put them in the film. We had them as almost a transition points from the film. So somebody wrote on YouTube after watching the film, are there supposed to be video glitches, or is it just really bad video production? Which was actually the fear of some of the people at Valentino, that it would be, would concede or considered to be a mistake. It was an intentional error. I mean, the mistakes are very important in the creative process as well. So they're probably more interesting than the successes, if you want. So this breaking for me became very important and showed a very beautiful digital world. And I think that people have to understand that actually the fragility of life is what makes it. I have to understand anything at all. I would like people to understand that my feeling is that the fragility of life is what makes it exciting. It isn't when you see something perfect. You go and see one of those movies made in Hollywood, and there's no mistakes. You can guarantee it's perfect from beginning to end. Everybody says their lines. Every bit of thing's been taken out. In a way, it can feel a little bit lacking. But actually, a conversation that you have with somebody walking down the street when they can't remember something and they slip up on a word is actually in some ways feels kind of better. The difficultness of life, the fragility, the mistakes, all those things are kind of what makes life feel rich, and what also makes it feel like life. When you see a totally seamless, perfect, if you want to call it perfect, it just feels a bit like, it's entertaining, it kind of looks great, but actually it doesn't really touch me anywhere. Whereas something much more fragile, delicate, isn't so perfect, I enjoy a lot more. So, okay, moving on again. Next question. It's again about the same thing. It was on Instagram, which is one of the pictures from Valentino show. And it said, JRMYK12 asked, may I ask if this was achieved using Lightform? It was a projection, and we were projecting from a projector. And when you set up a projector, it has a sort of focusing grid, which is just so that people aligning the projector can make sure it's all in focus. And when the focusing grid went on this on this dress, it just made it look like it was made of mist. The structure of the light was so intense, everything between it just felt very nebulous and like a cloud. So that's what it was. I don't know what Lightform is, I'm sorry, I probably should, but I don't, and I don't think it was made that way. It was literally just a projector grid. So, this is one that comes, same thing here, and I wrote, let me just see if I can get my phone so I can see if I can remember exactly what I wrote with this post. Sorry for being unprepared. It's about mistakes of life. So I wrote with this post on my Instagram, the future needs to be in the hands of artists and dreamers because our imagination is our greatest strength. Somebody who goes under the name of UNMANTLE_SEATS, unmantle_seats. That's a bold statement, seeing that people live longer and chronic diseases are becoming new pandemics. Everyone has imagination, but some don't express it as much as others. How do you think innovation happens? Those are quite bold statements as well, unmantle_seats. I don't know. My point of saying that was that my fear for the future and how the future is being defined at the moment. A lot of future technologies are invented by the military, so they're invented essentially to kill people. And some of those technologies then brought into the sort of civilian population or civilian life. I think that something that is created its origin to kill isn't something that we should be shaping the structure of our future. It's a philosophical point, sorry. But I don't really think that that's how we should be living our lives, shaped by technology that's been designed to kill. The other thing that pushes things forward is big business, so capitalism. I have increasing problems of believing that everything that we do is for a profit for somebody. In some ways, it would be very nice to think that we do things just for the love of it, and not to make any profit. In fact, money shouldn't come into it. I have a difficult position with money. Obviously, a lot of the work I do is commercial in the sense that I get paid for it, but a lot of it is totally not. I pay to do it, or we do it for free, or whatever it is. And I find the idea that success is based on how many units you sell isn't a good value of success. And I have a sort of growing difficulty with having money in part of the creative process. Anyway, my feeling is exactly that it should be artists who are really sort of presenting a future to us. Art, and I think somebody asked later on rather difficultly, what is art? Art is something, which in a way it's our highest achievement as a species. It's free thinking, it's culture, it's opinion, it's all those things brought together in the most, in creating visions that people are drawn to, that they never forget. All those, it's in a way our highest achievement. As a sort of, as a life form, it's what we do better than any other life form that we know of. So I think it is really important that artists are the people who in some way shape the civilizations and the culture we're in. It probably it probably was true in the past more, and I think, but now technology is getting so driven by the military. And then that's what worries me. That's my point in my post, that actually I think that really artists have to engage. And I guess where I get a little bit sad is when I see or I read other artists sort of who want shunning technology as if it's not the real thing. You've got to be in the room to see the dress, to feel it, to get something. No, you haven't. You didn't have to be in a church to appreciate Michelangelo. There are different ways of appreciating life. And an artist's job is to show you different ways that you wouldn't expect. So that was my point of writing. I hope I in some way answered your question. So moving from Valentino to the fantastic John Galliano at Margiela. Now John also approached me at the beginning of lockdown and said, I want to do things differently. We can't do a fashion show anymore. And that upset me for a while. I sort of went into mourning for the fashion show. But then when I got through that and realised actually, there is a different way of doing things. There must be a different way. It can't just be that we can, as creative people, we can only show our clothes on a catwalk, and that has to be the only system of doing it. There must be other ways. And a lot of things I do that people never realise. They never realise that, this is me speaking for John, they never realise that I cut my dresses on boys and on girls. All these things just people don't know. And so what John Galliano did is he put webcams and GoPros all the way through his atelier. So on every model or every person was there would get a moment to wear a webcam. So you could see the people working in the atelier. You could see their hands sewing, or you could see John fitting a hat or a piece of clothing, or you could see different people in the atelier working away doing their different things, and the different Pat McGrath coming in talking about the makeup, etc., etc. So the whole of the process was exposed in this project, and John believes very firmly that he's looking for a new way of showing his fashion, and I'm obviously totally behind that. And we did in the end the project was called Swalk, which is an old sort of 1950s what you used to write on the back of one used to write on the back of a letter, which is sealed with a loving kiss, which is a very delicate and tender thing to do, and very sort of another time. And the whole of the project was called Swalk, and it was John showing the process of making clothes and what he goes through, and showing all his references and showing all his communications. It's a very, very, incredibly honest and incredibly open way. John, who is a man who is to some degree guarded in what what he says and how he presents himself. So for him to be totally open, and there was no sort of you can't put that in of me. There was no kind of censorship in that way, in a vain way or in a political way or whatever. It was just show what I do, and let's show it, and that becomes a thing. And John's enormously charismatic. If you wanted to do a kind of Hollywood film, you wanted a central character which should be really appealing, John Galliano is that central character. He is otherworldly, or certainly from another time. He speaks in a different way to the way most people speak. He has incredible knowledge, and an incredibly engaging way of communicating with people. So it's a fascinating central character in this film. So that was what the idea of Swalk was, is to show a collection by showing the process of creating it, and at the end of that process, making a fashion film from it, which we did, and the language that we use with Margiela and have been doing for 2 or 3 years now has been the sort of inversion of things, the inversion of colour, the inversion of light and dark. So you start working in a completely different world in any case. So what we're seeing visually is totally different to how our eyes see it and perceive it. So you always see white lights, like a band of white lights. So in fact, you can see there, the sunlight is white. Inverted, that's a big block of black creeping towards me. That has a different emotive feeling. And so working with these things, and this is one of the pictures from it, and you can see that's a girl walking through a white spotlight, but of course there she's in a black pyramid. You know, there are symbols. It's just the inversion of the colours and the light doesn't just mean you're seeing a negative. It means you're seeing different symbols that say different things to you. Light and colour and shade and all those sorts of things are incredibly emotive things. So we're looking at an abstract painting, you know, you're just seeing, you know, pure colour juxtapositions. You know, but it's because those things are emotive to us. So we look at something. It's, you know, it's the same as the Rorschach's test. You know, you look at an ink blot and it looks like a butterfly. To you, to somebody else, it looks like their mother-in-law. Yeah, who knows? But so, you know, when you start to present these sort of, you know, very different visions of life, then you get through to a kind of very different world. So we made a fashion film that went at the end of the process, and we shot. We also asked a writer called Kira Janess to write a script that was threaded through it. And she's a horror story writer, a fantastic horror story writer. And she looked at all John's references and sewed rather discreetly the beginnings of a horror narrative within it. The horror narrative, you know, is about, you know, based on what might be something which one might feel, is that clothes adapt to personality when they're worn by somebody. So the shirt you got married in might feel different to the shirt you didn't get married in. You know, the shirt somebody, or the jacket somebody killed somebody in, must be imbued with the terror, the horror, the awfulness of that situation must in some way seep into the fabric. So that was the basis of the beginning of Kiela's story. And so when you see the Koji at the atelier ripping the seam open to you know, create a new shape for an old vintage piece of clothing that he's found in a vintage clothes store, you hear a sigh as if something's been released from it. Anyway, I'm not going to give the whole thing away. You have to look through it and see. But so it was a very, very interesting proposal of this very open process film. Very open process film, and you know, then the fashion film at the end of it, and then this sort of slightly kind of, you're not even perceiving that you're being told another story at the same time. Part 2 is in September. So me just rambling away means I haven't asked a question. So somebody, when I posted this picture, somebody said to me, somebody by the name of HUMMUSAINTGREEK, Humus St. Greek, fantastic, wrote, missed it, will the film be available on any platforms after the showing? Yes, it's on SHOWstudio now. So if you go to SHOWstudio, you can see not only an interview with myself and John Galliano, but also the SWOG. So that's up there. It's also, I think it's on the Margiela site too. So this is a question that came from, I did an interview afterwards with John Galliano via Zoom. And this came from, this question comes from somebody whose name is spelled BORREAK, KERDIJK. Being dyslexic, this is a real test for me, trying to work out how to say these names. Anyway, you know who you are. Who wrote Really? Future. Welcome to the digital era where you can capture slow-mo and have a close-up to textile to make it look tactile. I think that's a criticism. I'm not sure, and you'll excuse me, I'm not criticising you for not making me understand. I'm sure you have a good point. My hope that I've interpreted that, my guess is that you're sort of saying, don't you have to be, you know, the digital era isn't as good as sort of, you know, seeing things in the flesh. Maybe that's not what it's saying, but that's what I'm reading in the question. And against what I was saying before, there are different ways of expressing a fashion collection. And it doesn't mean you just have to do what everybody's done for the last 70 years. And, you know, actually seeing a different expression of the designer's ideas, rather than just mundane old catwalk, everybody walking up and down, and understanding what their clothes mean. You see, in a way, this all started for me many years ago. Sorry, it's incredibly hot here in London today. This started for me many years ago, when I was working for John Galliano at Christian Dior, and just before one of our sessions when we were doing the advertising campaign, when the hair and makeup were being done, and there's normally about 3 hours of waiting around when that happens, John and I sat down together, and he said, let me show you a video of my last collection, the one we were photographing. So I said, yeah. Anyway, he sat next to me, we put the video on, and then he talked to me all the way through. I said, okay, well, this bit is about this, and this music Jeremy's done to mean this, and I cut this dress because it cuts better like this, and the fabric, and explain everything. the whole reason to do the collection, all the references, how the dresses were made, everything. And all of a sudden, you understand the collection, and that's why I'm convinced, A, that people should look at fashion as an art form, because it has every right to claim its place as one of the highest art forms that we have. I mean, you have people like John Galliano or Rei Kawakubo, you name the designer, but there's great designers creating amazing cultural statements in their collections and bringing references from all across the world, from different times and from different cultures, and mixing them together and creating something new. And it's very, for me, it's incredibly. It is an incredible art form, and John explaining it to me, it's a bit like, imagine walking through a museum. You go down to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, or to the Tate in Britain, or wherever, and walk through with somebody who knows about the art and explains to you why Titian did that, or why Rembrandt did that, or what Baldassare meant with it, whatever it is. That's incredibly enlightening, and then you understand the picture or the painting so much better. The same is true of fashion. We are presented fashion in such an arrogant way, as if we're supposed to already understand it. How would that be possible? Only for scholars of fashion who spend the last 30 years of their life studying fashion would understand it. Fashion journalism tends to speak to the industry. It doesn't speak to the public. And the fashion shows are geared up not to admit the public. When I first started going to the fashion shows back in the mid-80s, it was like 300 people would go, a little group of people, and the public weren't given any access to them whatsoever, or very seldom. And I remember seeing desperate fashion students, young kids from Studio Berceau in Paris, trying to climb over the rails to get in to see a Mugler show. Desperate. I gave them my ticket and said, well, you're so clearly desperate to see this, and perhaps you're more deserving than I am, so here's my ticket. But it was such a close thing. And I think the fashion industry is then, the journalism around that grew up talking to the industry itself. And actually, it's a great art form. You need people who can speak about that and can speak to the broader public in an interesting, enthusiastic and knowledgeable way, which is hopefully what John did. I keep getting the feeling I'm rambling, so I'll try and move on to the next question. I'm going to skip that one with all due respect, because it'll take me back. This one from somebody who I recognise. I posted a Magritte because I thought it was beautiful. And somebody whose name I recognise but can't pronounce, C.DRZYMALSKI, wrote, "What is art?" It's an interesting question, interesting thing I might know. I guess art is communication. It's a sort of summation of your opinions and your views, and your passions, your desires, your hate, your love, your anger. It's any emotion you choose to express visually. And I think that's probably what art is. It is just communication. It's sometimes one is burning to say something. And it's not even relevant to, sometimes you just sort of say it because you have to say it. It doesn't matter if anybody sees it or knows it or understands it or anything else. Art is just our way of expressing our inner feelings, like what is going through here and through here. In some form. It could be theatre, it could be singing, it could be painting. That's art, I guess. So, yeah, don't know if that answers the questions. Anyway, moving on. I posted this picture, which is a 3D scan of the lovely Kate Moss, taken back in God knows when. And somebody wrote to me, somebody called POLINUCHA.beauty, Polincha Beauty, wrote, "Wow, scanning in 2003, how did you do it?" Well, I started scanning, 3D scanning things in 1998. I started with a company called Createch, who has now expanded, who were trying at the time they had got hold of some students from Edinburgh University who had made a sort of 3D scanner, a very early one. And I started with them and did a series of pictures, series of 3D scans with them. And then I found a chap called Kev Stenning, who's become a sort of lifelong friend. And he had a company called Rapido, and he still has it. And he's who I've done most of my scans with. But yeah, people were doing 3D scanning back in the 90s, mainly for sort of prototyping, car engines, and some work for sort of the entertainment industry. So things like people making prosthetics for horror movies and that sort of thing. So they'd scan kind of, whoever's face, whatever big Hollywood actor, they'd scan their face so they could rip it off or have it shot in half or whatever it is. So there was some 3D scanning at different levels. Createch, instead, a very interesting company, their idea was to reanimate dead actors. I'm not quite sure how that comes into 3D scanning, but that was the purpose of the company. It was a bit ahead of its time for different reasons, didn't really work out. But of course, that's what's starting to happen now, but that's a much bigger and broader conversation. Somebody who wrote about the same post says, same post came off, somebody called STREEPR, said, have you ever teamed up with Trevor Paglen? It would be super interesting. Trevor Paglen, no, he's a great artist, really. I know not that much about him, a little bit about him. Super interesting. No, our paths haven't crossed. He hasn't reached out to me, and as of yet I haven't reached out to him, but I do like his work. I do think he's super interesting. It's an interesting thing about collaborating with different artists. You on the internet you get to see a lot of different artists' work, and there's so many people out there one would love to work with, simply because there's such great ideas. And it'd be nice to see sort of how we can mix things together. But no, we're not with Trevor. I haven't yet. Okay, moving along now and changing. I posted this on Instagram again, which is a still from a film I did from a series which I did for Hong Kong Vogue with a beautiful Adwa. And somebody called NATHANSABATE.NTN wrote, Mr. Knight, are you aware of any good movie that takes clues from the fashion film genre with the artistic aspect to it and not just a nice styling? I'm not sure I understand your question, but I think I'll try and answer it as if I do. There are films which are based on the fashion world. An early one is Funny Face, which was sort of, I think, with Fred Astaire, and my memory's dreadful, I'm sorry. But I should do my research before I answer these questions. But certainly the important thing for me, and Audrey Hepburn, no? Whatever. Anyway, the important thing for me is that Rich Davidan was a creative director on it, or at least the photographic advisor who told them what a fashion photographer should look like. That was in the 1950s. So sorry to not remember the names of the actors, how awful. In the 1960s, you have another great one that comes along, which is called Blow Up, which of course is the Antonioni version of David Bailey's life, as far as we can all tell, which has sort of murder weaved into that storyline. But you see the kind of popular vision of what a fashion photographer was in the 1960s, apparently. And then in the 1970s, you have another one called The Eyes of Laura Mars, which was a bit of a sort of version of Helmut Newton and the sort of glamour death photography of the 1970s of people like Chris von Wagenheim and Guy Bourdin, Helmut Newton, who particularly photographed a mixture of sexuality and death and glamour. And there's a whole sort of scene through that, which is very much based on and was art directed, or indeed was a creative consultant on, was Helmut Newton. So there are some that come up. Since then, I'm finding it hard to find one, but I think photography, fashion photography, has sort of had a bit of a hard time defining what it is over the last sort of 30 years, since 1970s. There was, I think it's when media started splitting. Before, when you had Vogue was the main magazine, and if the headlines went up, the Paris fashion shows, the headlines went up across the world. In the 80s, you started to have a different culture that started happening. So you had magazines like ID, The Face, who showed a different vision of fashion. And so in some ways it sort of split apart. I mean, of course, there are lots of films that reference fashion in lots of different ways, but ones that come back to me now and specifically reference the fashion industry would be those three. I haven't, and if you're talking about fashion film, the medium that I've been talking about and creating for the last 20 years, I haven't seen anybody really put that into sort of mainstream film yet, partly because it is a film genre in its own right. So in a way, the fashion film has become of age and doesn't need to be reflected in mainstream cinema. It is its own genre of filmmaking. That's why SHOWstudio do a fashion film awards, because it has become something that is actually a very, along with the documentary and the horror film and different other genres of filmmaking, the fashion film is a particular genre. It's super early days still. It's 20 years old, and it's going to take time to evolve and to mature and to define itself. So it's at the beginning, which is great for some people. So people who wanted to get into fashion film, it's totally undefined. Nobody knows how long a fashion film is. Nobody knows what should be in it yet. So it's defining its parameters. And But also people are very critical. Now if I say I'm a fashion film director, people slightly think that's not a good thing to say. But actually, it's a bit, I should imagine it's a bit akin to saying I'm a fashion photographer back in 1920, when people also looked down their noses at photography as a whole medium. Anyway, so moving on, a complete change of subject matter here. So this is a series of pictures that I posted in some of the troubles we've had. And it's somebody called me_you_me. What are these images of closed boutiques from? They're actually not recent. They're a while ago. They're probably from about 2012. They were Bond Street, which is one of the central shopping streets in London. And what used to happen on the 1st of May you have May Day riots, which were basically a sort of bunch of kind of anarchists would sort of take over the streets and celebrate anarchy and freedom of thought and freedom of speech and everything, and a sort of an attack on establishment, an attack on status quo, an attack on everything. So anarchists. And the interesting reaction, of course, is, well, a reaction I thought was interesting, was of course all the way down Bond Street. All the shops got quite rightly terrified they were going to have their windows smashed and be looted, and so they boarded themselves up. So you got these the language of a sort of fashion boutique in a street like Bond Street or any of the kind of big shopping streets in the world is particular. It's a lot of research has gone into how to articulate the architecture, how to articulate the writing, the typography, all those sorts of things that it doesn't just come up by chance. These things have been market researched to death, and they've been people have spent an awful lot of time and money considering how their shop looks. So what the Gucci store looks like as opposed to the Saint Laurent store, to the Prada store, to et cetera. So these languages, sort of the language of the fashion boutique in the main fashion streets, are very, very well defined and very well at a very high level of I can't speak today. They spend a lot of time trying to work out how best to articulate themselves through their storefronts. So to see these bits of fashion language completely and brutally sort of covered up with cheap chipboard and all the same. So all the shops are trying to say, well, we're Dunhill and we're different from Prada, and Prada saying I'm different from Saint Laurent, I'm different from Gucci, but they're all next to each other. But actually, they're all unified. It's probably hard to say security companies do it all by cheap chipboard, most basic sort of material across every window. So basically, you had the sort of Prada logo and a chipboard. You had the YSL logo and chipboard, so the windows couldn't get smashed. I just thought it was a kind of interesting and slightly amusing state of affairs. But of course, had it been my shop, I'd have been terrified and upset. But it wasn't my shop, so one can take a little bit more of a removed, objective view of it. I remember also Vogue House on Hanover Square was also boarded up with chipboard. So the idea of Vogue, which the logo stands for, sort of elegance and refinement, above this super cheap wooden material, again, has sort of struck me as something quite interesting. Anyway, moving along. So a very, very quick one here. This is one of the pictures of my roses that I photographed and put out on my Instagram, and somebody called SUSANBARNESWARREN, Susan Barnes Warren, says, is that a photograph or a watercolour? It's a photograph. It's taken on my iPhone and put through Instagram filters, and that's what it is. And there's a show of my roses from a series which I've been doing for about 7 years now, which is called Roses from My Garden, and that's on show at Waddesdon Manor, which is in Oxfordshire. And I would absolutely recommend you go and see it. It's a really beautiful place, and I'm very honoured to Jacob Rothschild invited me to show there. So Waddesdon Manor has a show of my roses from my garden at the moment, and seeing these pictures which are taken on my iPhone and then printed up sort of massive, sort of 9 foot tall, the actual pictures themselves are very, I think, are very, very interesting, because they propose a kind of what almost looks like somebody's an old painting, but when you go close to the image, you can see that the structure of it is, because I put them through an AI and sort of refine them in that way. The structure of it is totally new. It's not a photograph, it's not a painting, it's something new. And that, for something that looks like it has all the sort of language of old painting, and actually go close to it, and it's about the future, I think that's kind of fascinating. So anyway, do try and go down to Waddesdon, because it's a beautiful show and it won't be on forever. I think it finishes in October. Anyway, again, swapping around, changing the subject. This picture, which is from a film that I did So there's a picture I did called Studs. This is on SHOWstudio. Do go and have a look at it. J.F. Porter 3 wrote, I love this one. It's a great work and a masterpiece. That's very kind of you. Taking me straight to my heart. I know the feeling. I have been going through these judgments and all what people want you to. Sorry, I'll try and read this better. I've been going through these judgments and all what people want you to be everything else, someone except yourself. Why? I don't know. I find it very strange when people discriminate against people because of their sexuality or their gender or race or whatever. I really don't understand why anybody would perceive somebody who feels that their body is not the right sex for their spirit. They want to change gender. They want to become happy. They want to feel at ease themselves. So why is that a problem to anybody else? I've never understood that. I've never understood how anybody with a brain can be racist. I just don't understand how people can come up with such twisted and warped and cruel visions of life. If you what's wrong with letting people be happy? If they want to do what they want to do, let them do it. It's their lives, not your life. Why should you criticise it? So I can't explain why people would want you to be anything other than yourself. Yes, of course you should try and be yourself. A lot of people don't have that ability because they're stuck in relationships where they can't express their sexuality or they can't express who they are. They have a very dominant family who don't tolerate that. One of the people I photographed there was from a country where homosexuality is illegal, so she couldn't go back home for fear that she would be imprisoned just because of her sexuality. I mean, in these times, I'm so surprised by the sort of almost medieval kind of attitudes that are kind of rearing ahead of racism and people who attack people for being gay or for wanting to be a different type of sexuality or a different type of sexuality. Or let humans be humans. Let whatever the richness of us as a society, as a civilization, as a species, is what makes us great. I don't want to be defined by any terms. I want to be me. That's all I'm going to be best at, to be honest. And if it means that I want to change my sexual appearance or my physical appearance, then that's my business and it's not anybody else's. And be happy for me if that doing so makes me feel more at ease with myself, more happy or more sexy or more whatever it is. Just live and let live. And I really can't understand that. And that spills out into other bigotries and prejudices and racism. And I don't want to get started on it because in a way, I quite rightly will get very, very angry. Although that doesn't solve anything, I just become an angry bloke. It's mind-boggling that we've got these awful attitudes. You see them coming out and across the world. It's awful. Let people believe in what they want to believe in, be who they want to be. Their sexuality, their religious beliefs, any belief structures, all those sorts of things. As long as they're not harming anybody else, then leave them alone. Let them try and find a happiness that we're all in some ways looking for, and a fulfillment, and just be happy for them if they're getting closer to being happy themselves. That's what I would say. Anyway, right, so without going into some sort of huge angry man rant, so this picture here I posted, which is a picture by a photographer called Louis Farrar, who I love, 1950s, 1940s photographer, did a lot of work around New York, also did some fashion photography, a lot of street photography. This is one of my favourite pictures of his, of this gentleman here holding a little bouquet of flowers and looking, I thought, rather lost and rather melancholic and rather in his own world. Anyway, a couple of people picked up on it. Somebody who goes under the Instagram handle as GALGGUNAGUORIAINEN, and as a dyslexic I'm not going to try and string all that together. So what exactly makes it sad? I'm not following. How do you know he's lonely? I don't know if he's lonely or sad. It's an old picture taken in 1950. I have a clue. He might be totally happy. He might not be. I might have millions of friends. I have no idea. But the picture for me, when I saw it, looked like a man who was probably bullied by life, who probably wasn't particularly at ease with his position. This is all total assumption. I could be completely wrong. But for me, when I saw the picture, that's what it gave me. If you go and look at a Barnett Newman or some abstract expressionist, you'll come away with an emotion. Go and look at a Rothko, and you'll come away with an emotion. Nobody can say you're wrong in how you feel, what that Barnett Newman or that Rothko makes you feel. and it's the same thing with a photograph. You can look at it, and what you take away is what you take away. The truth of that photograph, the reality of that person's life might be totally different, but the photographer has expressed it in a way that he objectively thought about it. And it touched me in a way as a beautiful sadness. I felt love for the man in that picture. I didn't look at him with pity. I felt, that he looked like a man who probably was being quite unfairly treated by society around. This is me making a total story up around it, which there's no evidence for whatsoever. And standing at the edge and looking like he had some mental health issues, which made him feel that the world was aggressive. The way he's standing, the way he has his shoulders hunched, the way he's got his head down, the way he's looking timidly to the side, are all body languages which sort of say, I feel aggressed. They're that. When you're being attacked, you do that, or you fight. When you fight, you do that. It's, but he's doing that. He's not exuberant and out. He's introverted and in. And so that's my feeling. And he just has that sort of look. Anyway, I could be doing a total disservice. He might have had lots of friends, been totally happy, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For me, it was a picture that made me feel a love of humanity and a desire to protect where I can, or where one can, protect people who perhaps aren't so adjusted to this life as some of us are, and not so in positions of privilege or strength that some of us are in, and can easily lose. But just the idea of protecting our fellow man or our fellow citizen. And that's what the feeling got to me. And it touched on a raw nerve in me that made me feel sad. It made me well up in tears. And it's hard for a photograph to do that. It's hard for a photograph to actually make you cry. But out of the few photographs that make me cry, that's one. Anyway, so somebody else wrote, Astor Hugo, A-S-T-O-R-H-U-G-O, picking up on exactly the same theme, but still deal with it at the same time. What do you mean heartbreaking loneliness? What's the story behind the picture? How do you know he's lonely? I just explained all that. I haven't got a clue, but you just have to take, some sort of, feeling that you can understand the picture the way you want to. I've told this story lots of times. I'm trying to be very brief because I've been going on and on. I haven't got all day to do this, so I've got to stop very soon. But to try and be, I did a perfume ad for a French perfume company ages ago, and I produced a picture. I was given carte blanche to do it, and I produced a picture of what I thought was an angel, and I handed it in to the perfume company, and the CEO of the perfume company got very upset and very cross with me and said, why are you showing me a picture of a whore? So for me, this girl looked like an angel. For him, she looked like a whore. Nothing wrong with her looking like a whore, but I don't think he was saying it in a positive way. Anyway, and my point is, and I know I tell that story a lot, my point is that, people see totally different things in the same image. Let me see if I can get through another one. Oh, there's somebody here who's asking some very tricky questions. And I also saw he put something on direct message there. I saw it as well. So John Tucker Allen, JOHNTUCKERALLEN. I did a series of pictures here in my ongoing research into AI and how to use it and how it affects our way of communicating, and I'm super excited by it, and I think it is what's going to define the future, and is already. He wrote, conceptual thought here. If a bird created a similar AI and processed this same base imagery, would it still be recognizable? Would the visual effect present be familiar, like an acid trip, for example, as mentioned by some commentators? Just musing here. Cheers. So thanks, John. It's a super interesting question, and I'm not sure philosophically I have the time to try and go through it properly. I'm really interested in where we're going as a species. Evolution is taking us somewhere, and the factors in the world around us mean that we evolved in a certain way. Technology is becoming very, very bound up with our lives and how we work and how we live. Our little phones become almost a sort of technological add-on to us. How long before they're incorporated inside our bodies rather than being outside? Does that change us as a species? If I have a microchip in the back of my neck or implanted behind my eye, am I still human? And those sorts of things are interesting. It's not exactly your question, I know that. You're interested in what, if another species, like if a bird could create visions through, or we could create what a bird sees through AI. I find all that sort of cross-species thing really interesting. It's sort of, a lot of people will shun away from that. They won't even think about it. And there are certain topics it's very hard to get people to engage in an open-minded way. So if you start talking about, cross-gender, that we're more or less everybody's come on everybody. as I said earlier, that's becoming more something that people can understand, reasons why people might seek to be cross-gender. Cross-species is not something that people are really easily understanding at the moment. I can't think what it would be, but a mixture of technology and us as a life form. Again, people almost only see that as a negative thing. But of course, it's already happening with heart valves and all that sort of stuff. So we've already got technology inside our bodies. So it does start to engender a whole lot of really interesting conversations. And we don't really know how animals see the world. We don't really know how different. We don't. To be honest, we have very little understanding of how we see the world. So, it's not that these things are widely understood. In any case, we don't know much about ourselves. We don't know where our emotions come from, which part of our body generates love, or where it's centered. Or people will say, "I'm frightened." They hold their stomachs, but we think the stomach is it's for digestion only. But actually, it seems to be a center of emotion. There's lots of different things that we don't understand, even about our own bodies. So to start to look at how animals perceive the world is super important and a really, really, really exciting area. But no, I can't answer your question very directly. I simply don't have the knowledge to be able to do so, and it would just be conjecture. And I sadly don't have the time on this to do it either. I'm going to have to finish soon, but I'll try and get through some more if I can. So somebody here, who I feel I've seen before, _Mark David Ford, so _MarkDividFord, wrote, "Hi Nick, I wonder, when David Chipperfield was designing your house, did you specify with him where you'd like the window light to come into the kitchen, with particular regard to photographing roses on your kitchen table? As I understand it, as I understand it, you never photograph roses anywhere else in your house." Well, it's quite true that I don't photograph roses anywhere else in my house. There's a little pool of light which just happens to come in on my kitchen table, and it's beautiful. It's not even north light. It's just has some reason, as a beauty, the way the light hits the wall and hits objects you put on the table are really it's incredibly beautiful. And that's so I do photograph roses in that pool of light, and that pool of light happens to be on my kitchen table. To some degree, David obviously knew when David designed the house, I built a studio here. So to some degree, we looked at the light. The studio then never really got used as a studio for different reasons. It ended up being my children's bedroom, and now my children are all old and have got their own houses or their own situations. They don't live here anymore, so we've got to find something to do with that. So I might make it back into a studio. So yes, David of course made the house partly to hold a studio within it, but for different practical and logistical reasons. I didn't particularly want to have the teams of people that when you take a photograph come into a studio in my house. My house isn't big enough to accommodate that. But for doing still lifes and that sort of thing, I photographed a lot of the Natural History Museum stuff I did in that little studio over there. So he did take that to board. Again, quickly, this was for the Yeezy site, for the little documentary I did about the making of the Yeezy site with Kanye West. Somebody called Joseph _Wait, JOSEPH _Wait . So when do we get the site? That's a good question. Soon, I think, is the answer to that. I really can't divulge very much, I'm afraid. But yes, soon would be when the Yeezy site will launch. I'm sorry if I'm being vague. It is a bit on purpose. But you will get it. Actually, it's not. I haven't got the questions here, but a lot of people say to me, "Where can they see the Jesus is King film?" It is, I think, out on Netflix. I think, was it Apple Music? So it does exist. It was just launched in the IMAX cinema, but then I think they've just released it for general release on one of those platforms like Netflix or Apple Music. So it is generally available. Right. I sort of thought I was going to say at the beginning of this that pool of sunlight will take an hour to come from there to here, and when it gets to here I'm going to have to finish because the light on me is going to be quite strange, so we can tell it's getting towards the end of it. So I get quite rightly, I think, very animated about the state of our politics and the awful things that are going on in England in terms of the politics of what's happening in the Tory party. I'm absolutely aghast at what I see politically and across the world, not just in Britain, but because I live in Britain, it's very pertinent to me. And it's not that I have a lifelong hate of the Tory party or anything. I'm not a sort of natural Labour voter or anything. I am a paid up member of the Labour Party now, but that's just because I didn't want to have no say in the only party of opposition, the only seemingly party of opposition that exists in Britain. And I think the Tories are doing a very, very, very bad job. I think the way they're behaving is dreadful. So I get upset about it. I mean, I live here. I'm subject to the laws and decisions that are made. I mean, anybody who follows me will probably know that I'm very staunch pro-European, and dreadfully looks like we're going to be pulled out of Europe for no good reason whatsoever, without ever being told a really good reason. I naturally would want to be part of Europe, and I grew up in France and in Belgium, so I naturally have some affinity there. But I like listening to the other side of the argument. So for 3.5 years, I've been trying to wait for somebody, one single person, to give me a good reason to leave Europe, and there's none. There are none. It's just all bad. Anyway, sorry, trying to not do my Brexit speech again. Anyway, so I posted something which actually was to do with the Prime Minister's handling of the dreadful COVID-19 pandemic, and how, at the beginning of it, how Boris Johnson went around saying, I'm going to shake hands with everybody, and we should have group immunity and all, it's crowd immunity, or what it's called. Anyway, and consequently, didn't enforce things properly, and the message that had come out of the Tory party has been, and how to deal with lockdown has been so messy and so mixed up, and people don't understand awful things like sending people back to care homes without proper testing, and things which will appear criminally negligent to me. And I don't know, I'm not accusing people, but just trying to see the evidence in front of me. And so I find it very, very hard. And I do find it difficult to look at this Tory party and see anything good in it, other than it's really kind of like disorganised and some other agenda that we don't really see yet. And I'm not trying to do conspiracy theory. I just can't understand what they're doing. It doesn't seem to be for anything other than their own personal gain. We have a pandemic. We have the worst recession about to hit us. Is that the time to pull out of the biggest single market in the world and stand it alone when America's about to change precedent? And we've got no idea what the relationship will be. That's the time you want to take your country out of any financial security? And for what reasons? Anyway, sorry, there you go, slipping straight back into Brexit. My point is, I wrote something about how upset I was about the handling of the pandemic, and somebody wrote back to me, isn't it kind of obvious right now that politics or politicians never have and never will have the well-being of people and the planet as their top priority? No, I don't agree with that. I mean, I grew up with a generation of politicians who I did look up to, who I did respect. I might not have agreed with them, Michael Foot or Margaret Thatcher or Arthur Scargill or Heseltine or these people, or before that Wilson and Heath, and I'm 61. I've grown up with a lot of different politicians, and yes, I did have respect for them. I didn't agree with them. I didn't agree with their politics. I didn't agree with their thoughts of how they were going to change our country or our place in the world. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. But I respected them as intellectual people. I respected them as political people. Of course, there were scandals, but often sexual scandals. And to be honest, who fucking cares? So, the politics behind, yes, I respected. And no, I no longer respect the government that's in power. I don't think they have our long-term benefits or the benefits of the people or the care of the people at heart. There's something else going on. And certainly in terms of the planet, Christ, we're making a mess of it. And we need some radical change. We can't just have short-term politics and this divisive system where they only care about getting re-elected again, and that's it. Everything else goes by the wayside. We're ruining the planet we live on. I'll try not to slip into political rant. It's not particularly edifying, but you can sort of tell how I feel about it. Right, so I'm going to have to finish very shortly. Sorry, just to read these as I'm going through them. Sorry. So this is about new technology. I thought I dealt with that already. Very quick one. Somebody called Martin .luttecke wrote, "Hey SHOWstudio, can you please bring back the In Fashion series?" Yeah, it's all the In Fashions are still on SHOWstudio. If you go and see them, they're really, really great interviews done by great editors, from Penny Martin to Alex Fury to Lou Stoppard, Georgina Evans. There's some really, really great interviews on there. You should really definitely go and see the In Fashion series. And yes, we will be adding to them. But SHOWstudio is a reasonably small team. We have lots to try and do. The Valentino and Margiela really took up SHOWstudio's resources trying to put those two together. And of course, I work with Kanye a lot, and that takes up our time as well. So yeah, we are certainly planning to do more in fashions, and it's one of my favourite series, so there's no chance we're going to stop. This is a good one. I'll finish on this one because it's an important one, or at least one that I can talk about. So this is from Jake. This is something that was posted on YouTube. It's from somebody called Jacob Ars, A-A-R-S. It was posted 3 months ago, so you can tell how often we get around to doing these AMAs. He wrote, "Hi Nick, how would you describe your working relationship with your assistants? How do you work together, and what do you think makes a good assistant? I know several of your former assistants have become great photographers and image makers after working with you, so I'm curious in the process and the way you work together." Well, my assistants are incredibly important to me. I've had lots over the years. I tend to have one main assistant, so what I guess gets called a first assistant, who is an incredibly important relationship next to me. At the moment it's a young man called Tom Alexander, who's a very lovely young man, incredibly hardworking, a lot of belief in what he does. And it tends to, well, they stay for 3 or 5 years with me, and I really, the first couple of years they're learning the ropes, so they're permanently making mistakes, but that's fine. When makes mistakes are part of what we do. But then they start to get really, really good, and then of course then they leave, and they break your heart when they leave, because in the end you kind of, I don't want to say you fall in love with them, but they become your friends. You get very close to your assistant because they see you at your worst. They're there to protect you, to help you. They're there to try and make your day better, to try and make things work. I'm incredibly grateful for everybody who's assisted me, even from the person that's come for one day and then never come again. They've come and helped me. If somebody helped you walk across the street, you would be grateful for that person. So anybody who's ever assisted me, I'm incredibly grateful for. So I take this opportunity to thank all my assistants. But of course there are some that stay for 3 years or 5 years because they're very good. They're either very good, they're both very good at helping me and making my day better, and making what we do at SHOWstudio and in my personal photographic career, image making career, helping with that. And they're also very good image makers. And what tends to happen is over the course of 2 or 3 years, I start to understand them as image makers rather than just understanding me. And I start to see the talent within them. When I take on a new assistant, it's always a gamble. You sort of look at their portfolio, or you look at them and think, I think they've got some talent, but it's a guess. But sometimes talent is just a question of opening up some doors for them, to allowing them to see things, allowing them to understand things, and their talent blossoms. And because they're with me for sort of 3 years, very, very closely, I mean, some of my assistants like Craig Medine live with me. So, it's a very close relationship. And it's a bit like having a new best friend. And of course, imagine I said to you, your best friend is only with for 3 years and then they're going, that would break your heart. So, I find it quite difficult sometimes to let my assistants just go and start their new lives, but I have to. Once they're ready to go, they have to go. I can't hold them. I can't hold on to them. Some come back and work in different ways. Ruth Hogben was a very good filmmaker, so she almost sort of changed from being a photographic assistant to a film editor. People's skill sets change. So they're all different. None of them are the same. I don't look for the same sort of assistant, but it is a little bit like losing your best friend, and that's quite tough, because when a good assistant goes, somebody you've been with for 3 years or 5 years of your life, really every day, and they've seen you furious, and they've seen you in love, and they've seen you happy and sad and cross and frustrated and lost, and all the emotions that we go through, and they've been there for you, they've had your back, and then they go. Quite naturally, you feel lost and desperate, and and it's very, very hard to find somebody just to replace that person. In a way, in your heart, you don't want to replace them because our friendships are formed. And I stay friendly with a lot of my ex-assistants. So I go on holiday with Craig occasionally, and I see people on and off through just sort of socially, just to say hi, and they're always welcome to come back and say to me, look, Nick, I've got a problem with this, or I don't know how to negotiate that contract, or so I kind of, I'm there for them as much as I can be. But to be honest, after 3 years with me, they often they need to go and find themselves. But some stay for longer than that, So I don't know if that answers your question. What makes a great assistant? Somebody who understands what I'm trying to do, somebody who is kind, who's gentle, who's honest, who's not dramatic, somebody who can see this as understand that they are there to help me. It's not a photo school, so although of course my assistants learn, that's not the proposal of having an assistant. The proposal of having an assistant is somebody who's there to help you. Is to make your day better in whatever way they can, or to set up the studio. But they're not just technical assistants. These are almost like, by some way they're like apprentices. So I'm by doing it, teaching them a skill and teaching an attitude towards image making and photography and film. So they're there partly as a technical assistant, but partly as your sort of companion, as somebody who you can turn to. Shoots are incredibly pressured. If you've got somebody's multi-million campaign riding on your ability to take a good picture, and that the only thing that's going to make that happen is your ability to create a great image, the pressure on you is enormous. If you're taking a photograph of somebody who you admire enormously, and yet you've got to produce an image in front of them that they're going to like and is a great image. I remember working with Robert De Niro and be terrified. How am I going to, this man is such a great actor. I've seen him all, Taxi Driver and Cape Fear, and all these amazing films. How am I going to create a new image of him? So you get scared beforehand, and you need somebody next to you just to share that sort of, say, what are we going to do, and just talk about it, and just in a normal human way, like you would with a friend. When faced with a dilemma, you turn to your friend and you say, look, I've got a problem, or I'm frightened, or I'm scared, whatever it is. And you talk about it, you talk it through, and that's what assistants are there for a lot of the time. Is also to look, because they in 3 years' time or 5 years' time will be facing the same sort of problems. So they want to see how I deal with the stress, because then they'll know some clues of how they're going to deal with stress. Of course, it'll be different when they get to do it themselves. They're not carbon copies of me, and God forbid that they thought they might be. But they will see how I go through things and how I deal with clients and friends and studio and lighting and all those sorts of things. But it's not a photo school. It's a very different relationship. It's a bit like sort of, I can't really describe it. I've tried to. Just to say, they're all very different. They're all, I'm incredibly grateful to all of them. And I have some lifelong relationships from some of my assistants who we stayed good friends. Some need to go and find their own thing, and I totally encourage them to do that. Some don't. Some are quite happy to maintain a sort of creative relationship with me, and I'm very happy for that. Obviously, for what I said, when people go who you care enormously about, and they sort of go out of your life, you're left feeling like you're missing a limb or something. It's a very hard feeling, and that happens once every 3 years. I've been working for 40 odd years. That's a lot of heartbreak. That's a lot of getting over the fact that you're losing somebody you care enormously about. But then this pleasure of seeing them do well and succeed, brings a lot of joy to me, and I love that. I love it when my assistants do well. And it feels a trade-off for all the late nights and the carrying things and all the hard physical work and all the determination. I'm not with Tom Alexander this morning because he is painting the floor at SHOWstudio. It's horribly hot here today in London. They have to do very hard physical work, but we all have, and we all do it. It's part of what we do. But they understand that, and they understand that this is a crash course in how to succeed in what they think is a career, and I'll give them everything in my heart to help them do that. So the exchange hopefully is correct, and they don't feel that they're being exploited, and I would hate to think they did. I try and give them everything that I know, all the knowledge I know, and not hide anything from them. They're totally privy to my private life and everything else in my, they go through my archive and everything. They become part of the family. So, they are incredibly strong relationships, and I can't say I can't say it strongly enough. These are people that I love and I care about, and they become your friends and they can become part of your life. And so finding new ones is incredibly hard. And if it's we try people out and it doesn't work, it's nothing to do with them. It's just you have to find somebody who you really click with, and there's nothing to sort of define what that is. Anyway, the bolt of sunlight that was our time, our measurement of time on this is now getting so sort of present in this image making that I've become incredibly badly lit. So I'm going to stop the Q&A there. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll do another one very shortly. Thank you very much. Bye bye.